If recent reports are to be believed, Henry Cavill is officially out as the Superman for the big screen. Don't feel too bad for him though, because he now has a Netflix gig playing The Witcher. Seeing as Crisis on Infinite Earths has at least 3 different Supermen flying around, now seems like a good time to look back. The days of the DCEU Superman were a bit of a mixed bag. So much so that his cameo in Shazam was only from the neck down. Its Superman tended to make much darker choices that some fans didn't take kindly to. Other times, the filmmakers made choices about the character that just didn't make any sense. So let's take a look at Zack Snyder's Superman and some of the greatest mistakes he made along the way.
Excuse me.
Let's start with the very first mistake that divided fans over this version of Superman. At one point early in Man of Steel, Clark and his family find themselves staring down a tornado. Sadly, the Kent family dog is still trapped inside the car. Jonathan Kent rushes into danger to save the dog, but hurts himself in the process. He's too injured to get away from the twister and resigns himself to his fate. Clark, ever the hero, decides to save his father. Right before he does so, Jonathan holds up his hand to stop his son from saving him. He does this to protect Clark's secret from the other people hiding from the storm. This seemed like a valiant effort of a father to save his son at first. Then you think about it for half a second and it's just ridiculous. You see, Clark had this little thing called super speed. That means he was more than capable of rushing in to save his father without anybody seeing. Even if they were scared of alerting the other people around them, Clark could have taken him far away.
Excuse me.
The family could have explained that Jonathan was thrown from the tornado and made a miraculous recovery. The entire incident really made Clark seem stupid and very unheroic. It doesn't help that the Clark from Smallville faced a very similar dilemma and made a different choice. His high school crush Lana Lang was sucked into a tornado at the end of season 1 of the series. Instead of allowing her to die to protect his secret, he rushed inside to save her life. The only thing that undercuts this heroic act of bravery was the WB's very limited budget. It's kinda hard to feel the danger when Clark looks like he's saving Lana from a video game cutscene on a PlayStation 2. Who knows, maybe the Jonathan from Man of Steel was really just tired of being a farmer. That Kent farm didn't really seem to be thriving. The real disappointment though? Neither tornado featured a flying cow, like in Twister. Would it have been so hard? After Clark watches his father get dragged into a tornado, he goes on a journey of self-discovery. For some reason, this journey takes him to seedy dive bars and blue-collar jobs, because he couldn't have found either of those in Kansas, apparently. At one of these bars, 2 guys give him some trouble. One pours a beer all over his head. Clark, a man of honor, decides to let the incident pass. You see, just because he has the power to stop the man doesn't mean he should. Kids, no matter what, Superman tells you that violence is never the answer. Except for when violence is totally the answer, apparently. Mere moments after this incident, Clark decides to destroy the man's truck in a particularly dramatic fashion. This is ridiculous for several reasons. For one, it would have been so much better for Clark to just stand there and let the guy exhaust himself, swinging and swinging on that iron jaw of his. That would have hurt the man's pride and taught a valuable lesson on unwarranted aggression. Instead, he destroys not only his vehicle, but his entire livelihood. It's doubtful that the company he drives for is really going to believe that some random guy impaled his truck for fun. Also, it's going to be obvious what happened when Superman reveals himself within the next few weeks. That guy totally knows that Superman was the dude at the bar now. That's no big deal though. What do secret identities matter for anyway? It's not like his father died to protect that secret or anything. Too soon? Man of Steel had a clear directive. It was going to be the action-heavy alternative to the relatively easygoing Superman Returns. Director Zack Snyder threw in some Dragon Ball Z and his patented slow-motion action together to really show what Supes could do. Unfortunately, what Supes does better than anything is creating massive property damage. This problem was apparent in the movie's very first fight scene. Superman takes on the Kryptonian warrior Faora in the modest town of Smallville. You'd think that a kid who had grown up in the town all his life would be careful while having a superhero smackdown. Instead, he takes the same amount of care that a kid does at the Lego city he just created. Faora and Clark destroy roads, factories, and probably a few hundred people. Not to mention what they did to that IHOP. In a small town, that's basically the city's capital. It would have been so easy for him to move the conflict to an unpopulated area. He lives in Kansas. There are fields for miles. It's actually harder to have a big action sequence in a populated area in that state. After Clark saw the devastation that he'd made of his hometown, we can assume he made a vow to himself to be more careful next time. Through the tragedy, his character would have grown more responsible and wise. Never again would he let his superpowered antics hurt innocent bystanders or their property. Apparently that vow really didn't last long, because in his very next Kryptonian brawl, Superman and Zod do quite the number on Metropolis.
And I'm gonna stop you.
The two destroy offices, buildings, and even bring down a satellite on the city. They even managed to destroy the Wayne Enterprise building in Metropolis, which proved to be quite unwise. The two literally fly into space and then back to the same city. Could Superman not have changed the venue as they were hurtling back into the atmosphere? The real heroes of this situation had nothing to do with Superman. Whoever the construction companies that managed to rebuild the entire city by the time of Batman v Superman deserves a movie of their own. Can we just pretend it was John Henry Irons, also known as Steel? Not the Shaq version. Oh, nah, no way. The Zod confrontation ended in a very dark way. When faced with Zod's unmatched power, Clark decided to end his life to stop the threat. This problem really spits in the face of the kind of symbol that Superman usually stands to be. He's usually depicted as going out of his way to avoid deadly force. This moment really enraged fans who thought it was way too dark for the best superhero Boy Scout. The problem with this really rests on the writer's shoulders. They could have figured something else for Superman to do with this enemy. Instead, they had him dispatch the guy so brutally that they had to make Batman into a psychopath to seem grittier. In Man of Steel's defense, though, the Christopher Reeve Superman also took Zod's life. He was the nicest of all the Supermen, too. Everyone has an off day at work, I guess. Well, let's do a Zack Snyder slow-mo real fast before we move on. If you want to be a hero, be sure to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. I have it on good authority that Batman always turns on the notifications on his YouTube settings as well. Maybe don't fact-check that one. Superman probably has the most ridiculous secret identity out there. A pair of glasses really isn't enough to disguise a handsome 6-foot-tall guy who often reports on Superman. Christopher Reeve took on the challenge with incredible skill, though. He transformed his Clark into an insecure, bumbling, sad sack that seemed nothing like Superman. Henry Cavill really didn't think through his that much. In fact, his secret identity was so poorly done that pretty much everyone figured it out. It fooled Lois Lane for less than 30 seconds when he arrived at the Daily Planet. Lex Luthor and Batman deduced it so easily that it happened off screen. Even Jimmy Kimmel seemed to pick it up without much effort. Why bother with a secret identity if you aren't going to even try? It does make Perry White seem pretty stupid, though. This man's been a journalist for decades, but he can't tell that the guy who's obsessed with Batman is Superman? Maybe you need a new line of work there, Perry. Maybe you could be a cowboy. Fans eagerly awaited the big screen meeting of Batman and Superman for years. The idea was even planted in the WB's I Am Legend years before the movie came out. Once Batman v Superman was announced, fans couldn't have been more excited. There are countless stories depicting this meeting between the comics' best super friends. Not to mention the classic animated film The World's Finest, which showed them going from enemies to partners. The movie version didn't work so smoothly. The biggest problem was that these characters barely had a conversation the entire movie. So many stories have been told about the two men and their opposing ideologies that it's frankly ridiculous that they never spoke. All they exchange are a few mean-spirited words before duking it out. Do you bleed? Yuck. If Clark would have just taken the time to talk to Batman instead of just threatening him, perhaps the film would have ended differently. All he did was prove Bruce's point that he was a dangerous godlike being. He also failed entirely to score an interview with the most famous subject in America. So he screwed up as both a superhero and as a journalist. Way to fail, Clark. Things got even dumber when Superman decided to take on Batman. Sure, Batman's got no powers, but he was wearing a mech suit, and he had traps everywhere. Oh yeah, wasn't Superman having X-ray vision like a whole thing in that movie? Couldn't he have seen the traps underground? Or at least giant lead boxes underground that would be a little suspicious? Yeah, sure, at first Clark lazily tried to reason with him, but he gave up on that pretty quick. The so-called plot of the movie came to a halt so that they could have their titular confrontation, which Superman could have easily ended with that very first punch. Instead, he fell for all those traps and got beaten to a pulp by a guy wearing a bad Iron Man cosplay. Luckily for him, their mothers had the same name. Man, if his dad was still alive and got captured, Supes would have been in real trouble. Save Jonathan! Wouldn't have had quite the same ring to it. Superman lost his life in Batman v Superman in the most toothless big-screen comic book demise since Loki perished the first time. Literally no one was shocked by the twist that Superman was getting revived in Justice League. Once he was resurrected, he wasn't exactly happy to see the people who'd saved his life. The first thing he did was take on the entire Justice League without a word. Now, you might think that the freshly alive Superman might not have remembered who he was, but that's not true. The first thing he says to Batman is, "Do you bleed?" proving that he had all of his memories. So why did he go all Rambo on the world's greatest superheroes? The answer to that is that they, needed a big superhero scuffle like the one in Avengers. Though instead of a big confrontation about egos, Asgardian prisoners, and the value of teamwork, it was just nonsense. It's so weird that it worked out that way considering Joss Whedon wrote both scenes. The day Joss Whedon fails to compete with Joss Whedon is pretty sad. Although he did have a pretty rough deal going into Justice League, which we won't get into now. Okay, so obviously we have to talk about the infamous mustache now. While this isn't technically a mistake Superman made, it's the biggest DCEU mistake of them all. If you didn't know, Henry Cavill grew a mustache for Mission Impossible Fallout. So during reshoots of Justice League, he had himself a contractually obligated stash that had to be removed in post-production. And that removal resulted in, just all of this. What's crazy is that there was a very practical and easy solution to this problem. Give Superman a beard. They could have easily thrown a line about how Kryptonian corpses still grow hair or some nonsense like that. He's been featured with beards plenty of times in the comics, and it looks pretty good. There, Warner Brothers, I could have saved you millions of dollars and endless internet shaming. You know it's bad when the actor himself comments about how embarrassing the situation was. When Ryan Reynolds was advertising his gin company, he posted a video where he had a fake mustacheless upper lip. Cavill responded by saying, "Can't CGI the pain away. Make mine a double. We all feel the same way, buddy." And there you have it, all the worst mistakes Superman made in the DCEU. Were there any tragic fails that we missed? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.